So kind of the flip side of material breach is substantial performance, but that's got some nuances too, and so that's what we're going to talk about in this presentation. So to understand the relationship between substantial performance on the one hand and material breach on the other, you have to introduce and understand the concept of a condition. And what Section 237 basically says is, okay, each party's remaining duties are subject to a condition that there be no uncured material breach by the other side. Okay, so for example, I agree to build you a house. You agree to pay me. If we express this in terms of conditions, my building the house is a condition precedent to your obligation to pay. If I don't build, you don't have to pay. And that's the common law rule generally. And in fact, the common law was that until I completely build the house, 100%, you don't owe me anything. And it's only by agreement that parties typically change that to a situation where I build and you pay me as I go along, typically on a monthly basis for a project that's going to extend over a period of time. But the common law rule was I have to perform first, and then that triggers your obligation to perform. I build, then you pay. And if I don't build, okay, in the language of Section 237, that would be an uncured material failure by me, and therefore the condition of your obligation to pay, the implied condition of your obligation to pay, would not have occurred, and you wouldn't have to pay me. Okay, so the issue is one essentially of trying to avoid forfeiture. That's the work that substantial performance as a doctrine plays, is to mitigate the rigors of this common law rule, right? Because if I have built the entire house except for painting the hallway, okay, I'm in breach. I haven't performed 100%, which means that you don't have to pay me anything. And that seems a little harsh. So the doctrine of substantial performance arose as a kind of exception to this otherwise fairly rigorous rule under Section 237, that it's a condition of your obligation to pay that I have fully performed. All right, so let's look at some examples of how this works. Comment D to Section 237 gives the typical example of a construction contract, and it's really in the context of construction contracts that you get the concept of substantial performance, where you've got a contractor who's saying, hey, pay me the rest of what's owed under the construction contract. If the contractor has substantially performed, even though it's not been full performance, right? I have built the house, I just haven't painted the hallway, then I have a claim for the unpaid balance, and you've got a claim for damages attributable to my breach, my failure to paint the hallway. On the other hand, if I haven't substantially performed, I'm supposed to build you a house, but all I've done is dig the foundation and put up the framing, okay, no roof, no plumbing, no electrical, whatever, okay, that's not substantial performance. I've done a lot of work, but I haven't substantially performed. In that situation, I don't get to claim under the contract. I may have a claim in restitution, and that's another subject for another day, but if I have not substantially performed, okay, then we're back to the rule that my uncured material failure to perform, right, my lack of substantial performance means that the condition to your obligation to pay has not arisen, and therefore you don't have to pay because I have not substantially performed, which is just another way of saying I'm in material breach. Okay, another illustration. Builder agrees to build a house. Owner makes progress payments equal to 85% of the work. The remaining 15% the owner pays when the builder finishes. Builder completes construction, owner refuses to pay the $7,500 balance, which we'd call retainage in the construction industry, saying, hey, there are defects that amount to an uncured material breach. Okay, and we don't know exactly what those are. We haven't been given facts, but if the breach is material, say the roof's not on or something like that, then the contractor's performance is not substantial and the contractor has no claim under the contract against the owner. Although, again, contractor may have a claim in restitution for the value of the work the contractor's done, but the contractor doesn't have a breach of contract claim against the owner. On the other hand, if the breach, the defective work or the incomplete work is not material, for example, contractor's done everything except paint the hallway, then the contractor's performance is substantial and the contractor has a claim under the contract for the unpaid retainage, the $7,500. Now still, because the contractor's performance is only substantial, not complete, right? Contractors perform, say, 99% of the work, but not 100%. The owner still has a claim against the contractor for the damages for the defective or incomplete work. So it's not as though getting the ball as far as substantial performance means that the contractor is not still in breach. The contractor is still in breach. All substantial performance gets the contractor is satisfying the condition to the owner's obligation to pay. If contractor doesn't get the ball to the substantial performance goal line, owner doesn't have to pay anything. Now, it's worth having a look at this comment D to this section, which is just the caveat that, okay, what I've just described, those are all the default rules. Those are the rules that the court would read into a party's contract. On the other hand, because we've got freedom of contract for the most part, if the parties say, hey, this is a condition of the agreement, and unless contractor does X, whatever the condition is that we've characterized X as a condition, if contractor doesn't do that, then the owner doesn't have to pay, for example, regardless of whether the contractor is otherwise substantially performed. So, for example, if for whatever reason we agree that I have to do everything, including painting the hall, I have to build the house and paint the hall, and in fact, that 100% performance, including painting the hall, is a condition of your obligation to pay, then the law will respect that and will uphold that and say, okay, contractor, you agreed that doing everything, including painting the hall, was a condition. We're going to hold you to that. Okay, so comment D just is another way of saying parties can contract around the doctrine of substantial performance, but unless they do so, that's the doctrine that will apply, and substantial performance by the contractor will trigger the owner's obligation to pay, or whatever the obligation may be. Usually that's what it is. So substantial performance is really the flip side of material breach. If you've got a material breach, then by definition you don't have substantial performance. If you've got substantial performance, then by definition you don't have a material breach. And how do you know if you've got material breach? Well, you go back and look at the section 241 that describes the factors that go into determining the materiality of a breach. And if you've got a material breach, then you don't have substantial performance. What's the effect of that? The owner, for example, in a construction context, the owner's obligation to pay has not arisen because under section 237, it's a condition of the owner's obligation to pay that there be no uncured material breach by the contractor.